Part 1. The beginning of my life. My name is Anna, and I was born in a small coastal town where the sea sang quietly every morning and the streets always smelled of salt and flowers. Our home stood on a hill just above the harbour. It was a 2-story white house with blue shutters and a red-tiled roof that turned orange in the evening sun. We had a little garden in front, filled with tulips in spring, lavender in summer, and golden leaves in autumn. My mother loved flowers, and every morning she walked around the garden with a cup of tea in her hand, checking every petal like it was a small treasure. My father worked at the post office and always came home at the same time every day. He liked things to be quiet, clean, and proper. Our family was traditional, and everyone followed the rules. I was their only daughter. A shy girl with long brown hair and big eyes full of dreams I didn't dare speak aloud. When I was a child, I loved to paint. I could sit for hours at the small wooden table near the window, drawing with soft pencils or mixing colours with water. I drew the sea, the sky, the cats that walked along the garden fence, and the stars above my bed. I believed that life could be something beautiful, like one of my drawings. I dreamed of going to other countries, of seeing big cities and museums, of meeting people who spoke different languages. But in our town, girls didn't usually go far. Most of them married young, had children, and stayed close to home. My mother often said, "Dreams are nice, Anna, but reality is better. You need someone who will take care of you." Part 2. The marriage that changed everything. I was 20 years old when I met Daniel. He was visiting his cousin, who had just opened a bakery in our town. I remember the first time I saw him. He stood by the counter in a grey coat, holding a paper bag with fresh bread. He looked confident, like someone who always knew what to do. My parents liked him immediately. He had a good job in the city, worked for a bank, and wore polished shoes that never had dust on them. He spoke clearly and firmly, and he smiled just enough to seem polite, but not too much. My father said, "This is a man who can give you stability." My mother smiled and began talking about weddings just 2 weeks after we met. I didn't know what I felt. I wasn't in love, but I also didn't know what love really meant. I had never kissed anyone before. I had never held a boy's hand under the stars. When Daniel asked me to marry him, I said yes. I was afraid to disappoint my parents. I told myself, maybe love will come after marriage. Maybe happiness is something we grow into. The wedding was simple but beautiful. I wore a white dress that my mother helped sew, with lace around the neckline and small pearls on the sleeves. The guests ate sweet cake with berries, and the music played long after the sun went down. People said I looked like a princess, but I didn't feel like one. I smiled for the photos, but my hands were cold the whole day. After the wedding, we moved into Daniel's apartment in the city. It was clean, modern, and full of things that looked expensive. There were no paintings on the walls, no warm colours, no books by the window. The kitchen was quiet. The bedroom had dark curtains. Daniel liked things in order. He worked from morning to evening and often came home tired. I tried to be a good wife. I cooked dinner, cleaned the apartment, and waited for him to come home. At first, I thought I just needed time to adjust, but weeks became months, and the feeling of emptiness didn't go away. He talked about work, about money, about new technology. But he never asked me how I felt or what I needed. He didn't know that I missed painting. He didn't know that I sat on the balcony some nights, watching the city lights, trying not to cry. Part 3. The Man Who Saw Me. One cloudy afternoon, I went to the local library, which was 5 streets away from our apartment. I needed to get out of the house. I needed something to read, something to take me away from the cold kitchen and quiet rooms. The library was small but warm. It smelled of old paper, wooden shelves, and fresh coffee from the cafe next door. That's where I met Leo. He was sitting in the corner, reading a book of poetry. He wore a brown sweater. His hair was a little messy, and his eyes looked like they had seen both joy and pain. He looked up at me and said, "You look like someone who needs a good book." That was the beginning of everything. I laughed quietly, and he smiled. We started talking. At first, just about books. He worked as a literature teacher at a school nearby. He loved poetry, music, and art. He asked me what I liked, and for the first time in a long time, someone really listened. I told him I used to paint. He said, "Why did you stop?" I looked at the floor and said, "I'm not sure. Life got in the way." Every week I returned to the library. Sometimes I said I was going shopping, but really I just wanted to talk to him. He brought me tea once, on a cold day, and it made my hands feel warm even after I left. Leo didn't judge me. He didn't ask too many questions. He simply made me feel like I was still alive. Once he gave me a notebook with blank pages and said, "For your art, even if no one else sees it." That night, I drew a tree in the notebook. It wasn't perfect, but it made me feel like I was breathing again. I knew I should have told him I was married, but I couldn't. I was afraid he would disappear. And the truth was, I didn't feel married anymore. I felt like a ghost living in someone else's life. Part 4. The Storm Inside Me. At home, Daniel noticed that I was distant. One night while we were eating dinner, he looked at me and said, "You've changed, Anna. Is something wrong?" I looked at my plate and whispered, "I don't know." He didn't ask anything more. He went to bed early and didn't say goodnight. The silence between us grew thicker with every passing day. I started going for long walks. Sometimes I sat in the park, just watching birds and listening to people's voices. I watched couples laugh, children run, old people feed pigeons. I wondered if anyone saw me, or if I had become invisible. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold, Leo came to see me. He stood by the gate of our building and looked serious. I came down to meet him, and he said, "I'm leaving. I got a job in another town. I didn't want to go without saying goodbye." My heart began to beat faster. I felt my hands tremble. I wanted to say, "Stay," but I couldn't. He looked at me and said quietly, "I care about you, Anna, but I can't stay and watch you live like this." Then he turned and walked away. I stood in the street for a long time, watching the place where he disappeared. I felt like someone had taken the light out of the world. For the next few days, I could barely eat. I spent hours looking out of the window, remembering every word Leo had said. I remembered how it felt to laugh with him, how it felt to be heard. And then I realized something. I had never made a choice for myself. Everything I did, marriage, moving, smiling, was for others. But I was still here. I was still breathing. And maybe it wasn't too late. Part 5. The Choice and the New Life. One morning, I woke up early. The sun was rising slowly, painting golden lines across the floor. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the window, at the empty chair across from me. I took out a pen and a piece of paper. I wrote a letter to Daniel. I said, "I'm sorry. You are not a bad man, but I cannot live a life that doesn't feel like mine. I need to find myself again. Then I packed a small suitcase, just clothes, my old notebook, and my paintbrushes. I left the key on the table and walked out the door. I went to my parents' house. When they saw me, they were surprised. My mother asked, "Where is your husband?" I told them everything. My father became quiet. My mother cried and said, "What will people say?" But I looked at her and said, "They will say what they want. I just want to live honestly." After that, I took a bus to the town where Leo had gone. I found a small room to rent above a bakery. The smell of warm bread greeted me every morning. I got a job at a local bookstore, where I helped people find stories that could change their day. I started painting again. I drew streets, trees, faces, and sometimes just colours that matched my feelings. A few weeks later, Leo came into the shop. He looked surprised, but also peaceful. I smiled and said, "I'm here." He said, "I'm glad." Now we live a quiet life. We are not rich. We don't have a perfect home. But we have honest words, long walks, and mornings with tea and music. And I have something even more important. I have myself. Part 6. What I learned. So, what did I learn from all this? I learned that it is easy to live for others, to smile when you want to cry, to stay quiet when your heart is shouting. But life is not meant to be lived in silence. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say, "This is not enough." And when you choose yourself, your truth, your joy, your freedom, you are not being selfish. You are being alive. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it touched your heart and helped you see something more clearly inside yourself. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like. Subscribe to the channel for more real and emotional stories in easy English. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please share it with them. Keep learning, keep dreaming, and remember, you deserve a life that feels like your own. See you in the next video.